Good morning or afternoon, depending upon where you are. My name is Dr. Van Davis, and I am the Chief Strategy Officer for WCET and the Service Design and Strategy Officer for Every Learner Everywhere. We are grateful to have you join us this morning or afternoon. It's morning where I am here in Central Texas, at least I think for a couple of more minutes. And we're excited to share with you some work that we've been doing in partnership with the WCAG Policy Unit, which is the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, on how to leverage federal COVID-19 relief funding to support digital learning. We have an extraordinary panel with us this morning who are going to help us talk about some of these federal opportunities that you can leverage right now to support digital learning. We have with us Andrea Ballinger, who's the Vice Provost for Information and Technology at Oregon State University, Craig Lindworm, who's Vice President for Governmental Affairs at APLU, Stephanie Wickman, who's the Director of Instructional Design and Educational Technology for Front Range Community College, and Jessica Rowland Williams, who's Director of Every Learner Everywhere. We'll be taking questions throughout. You can put questions both in the chat and the Q&A, and we will be happy to take those questions during what's going to be a panel conversation this afternoon. I will tell you that unfortunately I have weather running through where I am in Central Texas. So if something should happen to me, Pat Lane, who is Vice President for Policy and Research at WCAG, is going to step in and ably facilitate the remainder of the panel, but hopefully I'll be able to stay with you throughout today. So I'm going to start actually, Craig, with you this morning, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that folks can see everyone. And I'd like to start with you and ask you to help us understand which of the available federal relief funds or federal sources can we possibly have participants use to leverage for digital learning? And maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what the future of federal COVID relief funding and non-COVID relief funding looks like.
Oh, Van, I'm happy to do so. Thank you for inviting me. Great to be with all of you. And certainly thank you for quickly taking away that photo of me, which just so clearly demonstrates just how much my hair has grayed over the 8 years since that photo was taken. So let's keep that away, please. I really want to start by talking a little bit about the 3 COVID relief bills that passed that included versions of a higher education emergency relief fund, really unprecedented support to students and to institutions to help transition in part to distance and digital learning as the pandemic necessitated. In total, that was about $77 billion in support through higher education emergency relief funds, including $40 billion in the most recent package, the American Rescue Plan Act. Of course, this was not a blank check to institutions, nor should it be. There are restrictions on use of funds, including portions of HERF that have to be for emergency grant aid to students. However, all of the funding could be used to help advance the goals of student success in digital learning. A recent APLU analysis found that for APLU member institutions, they have spent more than 70% of their HERF funding, including nearly 80% of the funding that must be used to support students through the form of emergency grant aid. So while there is some HERF funding left that institutions have not yet spent, certainly the vast majority of it has been expended. It is unprecedented in nature, and institutions should not expect that funding like this will keep flowing. This was, of course, to address the pandemic emergency. So, that provided an unprecedented opportunity to help of federal funding to help address these needs and for institutions to adapt federal funding to those kinds of expenses and opportunities to support students. But moving forward, it's going to be difficult for institutions to certainly rely on funding from the federal government of this nature. I'd also note, just on kind of a political dynamic, the largest swath of that funding came when, as Democrats control all of government, with most expecting a flip, at least partially or perhaps fully, depending on the November elections in Congress. That certainly would lead to new issues around whether Democrats can pass spending packages of that sort. So just a long way of saying that that funding has been just extremely helpful to institutions and to students, but it is one-time funding, and institutions should not count on that kind of funding coming again from the federal government. There are some other funding opportunities that exist presently. So, for example, it really hasn't received a lot of public attention, but the bipartisan infrastructure law does provide some funding opportunities. Most of that funding is flowing to states. So states will help, and there's a significant component to address broadband and connectivity. We've heard consistently from APLU member institutions around challenges that exist on connectivity, certainly in rural America, but not limited to rural communities. Extension of land-grant universities are deeply engaged here. But as I said, those challenges are not limited to rural communities. We've also heard from our urban serving institutions some of the challenges that students have in those communities relative to connectivity. So the bipartisan infrastructure law provides $65 billion of broadband funding. Again, most of it flowing to states. And we've encouraged our member institutions to connect with state government leaders and really help, try to help shape how that funding will flow from states to parties who have an interest and can help, address the needs of states and institutions and certainly students with that funding that could possibly flow. One area of that broadband funding that is direct support from the federal government and actually potentially to students and families is the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is support to low and middle income households to address connectivity. APLU is working with the White House to help spread the news of this federal support that is available. There are provisions of that program that actually help ease the application of Pell Grant recipients. So if you're a Pell Grant recipient, you're not going to have to go through all that burdensome of an application process. Being eligible for Pell means that you're going to be eligible for some subsidies for internet service up to $30 a month, one-time discounts on computers, laptops, tablets, and other connectivity devices that will certainly support students with digital learning. There are other opportunities moving forward, certainly in the advocacy realm, as we try to secure additional funding for Pell, and including a campaign that APLU helps lead around trying to double the maximum Pell Grant. We're deeply engaged in issues around a college completion fund and trying to secure federal funding to focus not just on access and affordability, but also the third component of college completion. And we are excited about some potential there. And I'm happy to talk a little bit more about those areas moving forward, but I'll pause there for now.
Thank you so much, Craig. I think that it's really important that what you've hit on is that not only are the COVID relief funds one-time funds, but that there are these other groups of funds, particularly around in the infrastructure bill, that haven't gotten as much publicity. And that's something that I know that Andrea is going to talk to us a little bit about later on, is what her institution is doing around that. Jessica, I I'm so glad that you could join us, even if it's just on the phone today. I'm wondering if we could turn to you before we talk about what's some really great examples of what's happened at institutions, and get you to talk to us a little bit about the role that equity in digital learning plays, and what you've seen in your work at Every Learner Everywhere. And that is, how do you think that digital learning can equitably support student success? Because I know that that's a huge piece of what we're talking about here this morning.
Yes, thank you, Van, thank you for inviting me for this panel. And I think first, I'd like to start with the way that we define digital learning within our network at Every Learner Everywhere. And we define digital learning as the use of technology and teaching practices that are enabled by digital tools to enhance learning. And this can include a broad range of content, communication tools, different curricular models, different design strategies, different student support services. But the goal of all of these things is to personalize instruction for students. And that can happen in blended, hybrid, and online learning environments. And I think it's important to just start with that definition, because we throw out that term digital learning all the time, and it means different things to different people. In terms of how digital learning can help promote equity, I think there's so many ways, there's so many thoughts and opinions, as you know, on both sides of this issue, right? And they've come up a lot during COVID, and we've seen certainly concerns around the use of digital learning, particularly raising questions around equitable access to digital tools and broadband. But digital learning has also shown incredible promise, primarily because of its opportunity to help us to shift away from a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching and learning, and to really begin to deliver that personalized learning experience to each individual student. And also, another important factor is that digital learning has been shown to help reduce the cost of instruction, which has for a long time been a barrier for students. We also see benefits to faculty through the use of digital learning. Many faculty report that when they're leveraging tools like courseware or digital course materials, that really allows educators to focus on teaching the concepts that students don't know, right? Because they have more data, they're able to get more real-time information around the concepts that students are grasping already. And so they're not spending a lot of time teaching things that they don't need to, and they're able to focus on the things that the students are really struggling with. And in terms of how this fosters a more equitable classroom experience, what we've heard and what's been happening in the field is that we've seen how digital learning has enabled faculty to deliver more culturally relevant material, enabled faculty to build community, even in virtual and online environments, and also to use the data that they are receiving from courseware and other digital tools to help monitor performance, which allows them to intervene early and quickly when students need support. And that's been so critical, to not waiting to the end of the semester to realize that a student is struggling, but to be able to get those alerts early, so that they can help that student to stay on progress to do well in the course.
I'm wondering too, Jessica, before we move on and talk to Stephanie and Andrea to hear how institutions have been leveraging these funds, if you could take a minute and talk to us a little bit about the way that equity can really be embedded in digital learning, in spite of maybe some of these challenges that students have and that faculty have around access.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great.
Oh, I'm afraid we may have lost Jessica there for a moment.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, great. Yes, no, what we're finding is that intentionally designed courses leveraging digital tools can actually, be very, very beneficial. What we're finding is that a lot of racially marginalized students, or marginalized students in general, are not just interested in having the opportunity to, leverage digital courses, but they're demanding that because it creates more spaces for them, more flexibility for them in their lives to both study and learn and have the opportunity to do coursework, and also balance other responsibilities such as work or family life. And so there are a number of stories bubbling up of faculty who are, leveraging techniques and tools to, again, offer digital experiences for students that don't require high broadband or high Wi-Fi. So that's normally done through like asynchronous design, right? So courses are not happening all at the same time, but students are allowed to participate using discussion boards or submit videos or other forms of work that allow them to display their mastery of the material in a digital format, but doesn't require them to have high-speed internet to do so. So there are a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of creativity that's being employed by our faculty, despite what we're hearing about students not always having access to high-speed Wi-Fi or all the same technology tools.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We're especially excited this afternoon to have two practitioners on with us. We've got Stephanie Wickman from Front Range Community College and Andrea Ballinger from Oregon State University. And one of the reasons we're excited to have them with us this morning, this afternoon, is because both of those institutions have done some really wonderful things in terms of how they leverage that COVID relief funding and how they're beginning, in Andrea's case, to leverage some of that infrastructure funding that Craig was talking about to advance digital learning and equity in digital learning. And Stephanie, I'm going to start with you. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about what y'all did with those COVID relief funds to leverage equity and digital learning.
Sure, I'd be happy to share. And thanks again for inviting me to be a part of this panel to share about some of the great work that we've done over the past couple of years with this funding. So we took the opportunity that this funding awarded us, knowing that it wasn't always going to be there, to revision some of our practices and move them forward. When the pandemic set in, we, as many institutions, were at a pivot point, if you will, to how are we going to serve our students? What is instruction going to look like? How do we get resources to the types of places where we need to get those resources to? And so we took a momentary pause, if you will, albeit a quick pause, to really do a needs assessment in terms of what is this pivot going to require from us as an institution? How does that impact teaching excellence, which is one of our foundational pillars as an institution? How is it going to impact student success? And the first place that we started working as we took that needs assessment and that temporary pause as we were going into a very quick pivot is to really re-envision how we are prepping faculty and instructors to take advantage of the online or the digital world. And so one of the first things that we worked on developing, offering through a small group of individuals, including instructional coaches, online chairs, and learning designers, was to revision our online instructor certification process. Suddenly, all of our faculty were tasked with being online instructors, many of whom did not have the skill set or tools to be able to do that. So we revisioned what we had as an existing process where we would welcome instructors who are interested in teaching online to learn a little bit more and get certified, to a two-part opportunity, if you will, to really set our faculty and instructors up for success across a variety of modalities. So we quickly rolled out part one of our two-part certification process, and we retitled that Online Essentials. The audience for this particular training opportunity was real-time remote instructors, hybrid, fully online, anybody teaching for us that needs to know a little bit more about how do I design for success in that environment? What does it feel like and look like to be an online student? We know that many of our faculty and instructors hadn't had the opportunity to ever experience a fully online class. So we worked on development of a 2-week asynchronous learning opportunity that were designed around the foundations of online essentials. This didn't focus on how do I make videos and how do I use the learning management system and what other neat tools are out there to engage with my students, but it took one step back from those to look at the foundational learning design principles of how do we design for learning in that instruction. Based upon that 2-week outcome, individuals got the opportunity to build a community of practice with their peers and work on developing plans to implement in their courses moving forward to be successful in the new online learning world. From there, our individuals that we're going to go on to teach a fully online asynchronous course were enrolled into something that was brand new for us that we visioned called the Teaching Practicum. I am really excited about the Teaching Practicum because I feel like this is that next step for our new to online teachers or new to online at our institution that is really designed to give them the tools for success. Through this semester-long 10-hour opportunity, individuals receive payment to go through a first semester experience. That experience provides assistance in prepping their course for the first semester, meeting with a mentor or an instructional coach 1 to 2 points during the semester to talk about the online experience and how it is going, as well as building a community of practice with fellow first-time educators in terms of the online landscape to talk about commonalities that they're seeing across sections regardless of disciplines. So that's one of the areas where we really invested a lot of time and resources into being able to reach out to our faculty. We've had about 700 instructors and faculty go through our online essentials, and we're picking up about 25 to 30 each time we offer that. Our online teaching practicum was very well enrolled at the beginning as we were moving much of our instruction to online. But as we continue to look at how the pandemic has impacted how we offer that instruction, we're seeing a steady number of new online faculty enter into those teaching spaces. So that's just one example of how we've used funds from this area to support teaching.
That's incredibly exciting to especially hear how you've been able to leverage those funds to not just provide just-in-time support, but resources that are ongoing for your faculty. Andrea, could you talk to us a little bit about what y'all have done at Oregon State and how you've leveraged both the COVID relief funds, which you've done very effectively, but also maybe talk to us a little bit about what you're doing with the infrastructure funds?
Oh, that's fabulous. First of all, thank you for inviting me. This is an honor to be here with you all. And I'm going to piggyback on Craig, Jessica, and Stephanie. So I'm going to make my job easier so that we can answer more questions. So at Oregon State, we were already in a good position as an R1 and land grant institution in Oregon in terms of tools. So we had Zooms, we had Teams, we had a lot of the technologies that we really required to turn this institution into a fully digital institution in 3 days. I'm very proud of that. It took us 3 days. Now, for the infrastructure, like Stephanie's talking about, not everyone was, not every faculty member or instructor was ready to go fully online. That was not the design. We're not an online university, although we have an award-winning program and a path, the eCampus, that has been doing that. Number 3 or number 5 in the country of how well they do it. So we had a foothold into the fully digital world. But what we had to do on the technology side was really reimagining the perimeter of the campus. We are mostly, first and foremost, a on-campus experience in all of our locations. So our security was based on the firewalls. Our ability to meet the students' needs was because we had a lot of, first of all, Wi-Fi everywhere, including in a swimming pool. And we also have labs where the students can come to if they are not staying with us in our housing. So they had all of the opportunities for them. We have an entire center dedicated for the students that do not have the means to have computers or to have Wi-Fi if they're living outside of the campus. So all of that was in there. But then when COVID hit, the infrastructure was there. We had to put it into I'm going to put it into a higher RPM. Again, we had to extend now the perimeter to the global level. That was fun on the security, not fun, but we had to do that. Also, the students went back home. They were no longer inside of our perimeter. So they did not have the same accesses to computers, people that knew what they were doing, Wi-Fi, or individuals that could help them with other things like this is a research university. How do you do a lab remotely? So we needed to actually find the tools that would allow the faculty members to have the labs being virtual. It's kind of a neat experience. But not all of our classrooms were prepared to have Zoom. So the faculty had labs, they had classrooms, but not all of them had Zoom capability. So we used some of those funds to actually upgrade all of our infrastructure on the classrooms to allow all of them to have Zoom. And Zoom, not just having a one-way, but also an ability to see the class, right? So you have the speaker speaking, but also cameras that are rotating, that they're seeing the students. A student raises their hand virtually or in person, because we had a hybrid environment as well. that the entire student population could actually engage. So we did that. Again, laptops. So we bought a lot of laptops to allow students to have it because now the labs were closed. We couldn't have the labs open or have people there making sure that there were 6 feet of distance. All of those things actually had to be done using technology. Proctoring of tasks. We have some high stakes tasks that we couldn't just rely on, having a class and everybody doing the work in 49 little boxes at a time, or if the faculty member had a lot more students, a lot of people actually monitoring that. We have to buy a proctoring tool. I am not a fan yet. They're not yet in a way that we can create that ability for the tool to identify when there are disabilities or there's somebody just, I think with my hands, you can tell because I'm using my hands a lot. I use my eyes a lot, but those are usually signals by a tool that, there might be, she's looking at someplace else, somebody's telling her something. So proctoring was a major challenge, still a challenge for us here at Oregon State. And then, licenses for things, Zoom licenses. We had tools, but we didn't have an enterprise level tool licensing. So we had to do that in grade scope, or you name it, all kinds of things that we need to do. So exciting stuff because it wasn't our plan already. So it was not new to us. Again, we had the starting mechanism for that. But during a crisis, you had to respond immediately. And we went first, and the institution was really good at that. Go where the student is at, meet the student where they're at. I think Jessica she didn't use those terms, but I think that's what she was talking about, right? Meet where the student is at. And if they did not have a laptop or they were in a household where the data network available to them was 25.3, start laughing now. And you have 3 people plus the adults doing work from that house. You can absolutely categorically say they could not do this because that speed, it is not available. And not every household has a laptop or a computer per person in the house. And you had those situations happening. And in our case, we're a land grant. We have locations in all 36 counties. We had to actually expand the Wi-Fi in our locations to allow people to be in a parking lots. Not the best environment for people to learn in a parking lot, but we didn't have any other way to help them. That's why, Craig, the broadband, it's my passion. That's where I'm putting all my eggs in a basket. And I happen to also, in addition to being a CIO, I serve as the chair of the board for Link Oregon here in the state of Oregon, where we are absolutely partnering with the broadband office in the state to make sure that it's between someplace around $700, $800 million that are coming in from those funds. But we need to fix that. We need to provide at least 100 gig to every corner of this state and allow people to have an ability to not only have an education, but also health. We all know as educators, if you don't have health, you can't educate people. They need to be physically and mentally in the right place. Then we provide the education. So Van, because I can talk for hours, let me stop and let you ask me questions so that I'll go where you want me to go that I have not touched yet.
Well, I love hearing you talk, Andrea. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about broadband, and especially I know that you've been doing quite a bit of work with the tribal colleges and universities there in Oregon, because I think that what we're seeing with this next round of infrastructure funding, there's really some exciting opportunities for colleges and universities to be active partners with their communities.
Yes, and I'm so glad you asked that. So we have 9 recognized tribes in the state of Oregon. And through Link Oregon, we are facilitating the discussion to find out what do we need to do as these monies are coming in. So as a state, what do we need to do to make sure that the tribes are not left behind? Every tribe has their own process, and some of them, not all lands are contiguous, people, right? We think that their lands are all together and there's little box, just like in Corvallis here, that we have just a little bit of a perimeter. It's not that way. How do we ensure that they have a place at the table? And in our state, the broadband office and the representatives are making sure that there's a representative from the tribal community to be able to articulate how unique their needs are. There's some places in the state that even if we had all the monies, even if we had physical networks everywhere, that you could still not find an opportunity for somebody. It's a lot of mountains and a lot of, the terrain is not as friendly for all the technologies we want. So how do we do that? We have had 2 summits with the tribal leaders and other folks, not just from the state of Oregon. We have had Idaho and California joining us as well, because this discussion is not limited to any geography. We got to take care of the population today, no matter where they're at. But also discussing this on the state level and finding out, it is we need to take advantage of all of our resources. The private ISP providers have an opportunity to go to the last mile. There's some public good that we can do on creating the middle mile. And then these large networks that really are infrastructure, you named it, and I think Craig used that term, it really is. We didn't take care of our highways for years, right? Some of them are better than the others. And we really have not put fiber everywhere to allow us to say that we are an inclusive state, to allow us to say we're reaching people where they're at, using the language that is most appropriate to them. This is another thing I would add to Jessica's comments. The digital world allows us to really, it doesn't have to be one set of language only. So if somebody has a different dialect or a different language, or we know that we have a large population of Latinos in our state, we can very easily in a digital world create that parallel process. They're still learning English, but they can understand by their native language. This is all exciting thing, and having that broadband opportunity and the infrastructure bill, because we're going to do this right, is going to allow us to leapfrog the past few decades and be in a place where we can truly say that inclusivity means something to us. It is our way of life.
That is really exciting. Stephanie, I want to go back to you here for a sec. You know, one of the things that I think is really critical in all of these conversations is how are we assessing success? And could you talk a little bit about how you have assessed the success of your initiatives and how you're using those learnings in the continuous improvement?
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. That evaluation, assessing what we're doing and its impacts and how that's influencing our next iterative cycles, is something that's a consistent practice for us. And it doesn't happen in just one way. It happens in a variety of different ways. And so in terms of the example I gave you with our Re-envision online instructor certification process, we've got a couple of different points. We're actually going through a redevelopment, a slight redevelopment right now, if you will, based upon the feedback that we've been collecting over the last couple of years. Our first place on our stop of assessment is talking with participants, both at the end of that online essentials component, right, for everybody. How did this opportunity meet your learning needs? What are you going to apply for as part of this learning opportunity? What are you taking with you, and how are you going to implement it? Most importantly, what kind of support system do you need to implement what you've been learning as part of this? So a post workshop, if you will, kind of feedback assessment. We also circled back around with folks one semester after they took the training and asked very similar types of questions. What did you incorporate? How did you incorporate it? How did you find that to be successful or challenging? What things became challenges that you didn't envision? And what things were successful that you thought might be challenging? So really circling back around with folks who had completed those opportunities to get a sense of their experience. We also ask students questions that are based around the design and types of modalities in our student feedback surveys we're doing each semester as well. And we look at those at a high level of common themes. We're not looking at individual course level, but we're looking at high level common themes about where we may need to be providing some additional supports and trainings. One of the things that we saw early on was that folks that were teaching in a real-time remote type of modality needed quite a bit of help with the technology. Not just, how do I get on and make the meeting for my class, but how do I use some of the other tools embedded within the Zoom platform, maybe to do polling or breakout groups with my particular students, to how do I create an effective environment in that Zoom classroom where it's not just me talking to 22 squares with pictures, maybe or maybe not on the screen. So how do we use that type of feedback to help us build more of those engaging experience? We're also using our practicum as well, right? Our practicum is a direct window into what is happening in our fully online asynchronous courses, and really looking at those experiences holistically, looking at what the community is talking about in terms of, I'm really struggling with this in my fully online course. or I'm celebrating these successes and I want to champion these successes and share them out with others. And taking that information back to that initial set of learning through that online essentials and figuring out how do we address those things? How do we mix it up to include some of those user stories so that folks can see themselves in the training as they go forth?
That's really exciting. And I think that it's one of those times where really being able to have, that insight through the practicum must be extraordinarily exciting. Andrea, I'm wondering if you could also talk to us a little bit about how y'all have evaluated the success of the programs that you've been leveraging the federal funds for.
Thank you, Van. I want to add one little thing on what Stephanie said, because we've done a few things on the preparing the faculty. We also train over 100 students on being tech TAs. So because I employed 130 to 150 students on my organization, and they didn't have an opportunity to work on campus because of COVID, because they all had to go home, we actually trained them to be the technical people helping. So every faculty member that wanted it was paired with one of the tech TAs on a technology. So they would do all of the Zoom and the hands up and the, there's a question here while the faculty member was focusing on their course. And then afterwards, they actually, because we didn't think we were going to be on this for 2 years, right, folks? Let's be honest. We thought it was going to be just a 6-month thing and we're all back to campus. But that actually gave the faculty an opportunity to really appreciate that some of the technologies that we have are that good that they can do both and they have hybrid classes. So just want to mention that. In terms of measuring, we do things very similar to what Stephanie said. So we measure the traditional metrics that we have online, GPA, academic standing, DFW scores, retention, persistence, graduation rate. But we also do, similar to what Stephanie mentioned, a discussion on the online medium. So the course design, because a lot of our students have had on-premise classes and virtual classes. So they can actually validate, is the course design online better, worse, or are you learning in a better way or not? The instruction itself, as we talked about, not every faculty member before COVID was trained and prepared to actually be in front of a camera and talking to a camera and to have to watch both worlds, the physical world and the digital world at the same time. Student services and academic advising. I mentioned to you on a little bit about that proctoring has been a very big challenge. The students did not like, the ones that were always online had that opportunity already. There were proctoring that you could do online with the service, or you could go to a testing center for us. But once we actually put 34,000 students online and we were doing proctoring, the students didn't like it because the cameras request you to look, oh, you're showing my house. And again, the technology is not that good. Their feedback was really good for the continuous improvement, Van, that you were asking about. We also did some new metrics looking at persistence online. So percentage of students that were registered 2 or more academic years, and how many have registered for 3 or more academic years in a row, so that we would not allow people to stop or to fall off of our radar because they were online. And in person is easier because you get bombarded by messaging from us on, don't forget you have to register for class, don't forget this is going on, financial aid time is here. But digitally, we didn't have all of those services for everybody else. We had for the campus because they were always designed that way. So they have a person that walk with them. But when you actually added thousands more of students, it was a very difficult thing to do. So we started measuring different things to make sure that we were not losing anybody. And then if they were not registering, we could actually have a dialogue. So what is it? Is that, we heard a lot, I really don't like learning virtually. And they are digitally people because they grew up with technology, but some people really require or prefer to be in person. So new metrics, and that we continue to actually evaluate because we're using that also on the on-prem for a lot of things that we're doing. And then seeing that this is new to us, that at least a very large population that the on-premise students are taking at least one online class right now. So that's telling us something, right? Hybrid is the future, even for institutions like ours that are primarily residential schools.
I think that last point there is so critical, that one of the things that we're seeing is that hybrid really is the future, that we're not going to go back to those before times where everyone was face-to-face and sitting in a classroom, but even our residential students are asking for some sort of virtual experience. I would just remind folks that if you've got questions, you can throw them in either the Q&A or the chat. While we're waiting for participants to put questions, I have a couple of other questions that I'd like to ask our panelists. And Craig, I'm going to turn to you. You did a great job of walking us through what those federal funds have looked like in the past. Maybe you could look into your magic ball and tell us, what do you think that the future of funding is going to look like, especially as we lead up to the midterm elections?
Well, thank you, Ben, and happy to elaborate on a couple of things that I very briefly mentioned. Here at APLU, we're really excited about kind of the next evolution of federal support for higher education and this direction of focus, not just on access and affordability, but also completion. The Biden administration had proposed a substantial investment through a college completion fund as part of Build Back Better. Now, while Build Back Better right now, to put it mildly, seems politically challenged, the idea is moving forward. And in fact, as part of the last omnibus appropriations measure, there was a small investment, but still an important one, of $5 million for post-secondary student success grants. Unlike the model of funding under Build Back Better of providing money to states to partner with institutions to really boost student success and completion using evidence-based practices, this one is actually going to be direct federal support from the U.S. Department of Education to institutions. $5 million is not enough for the enormity of both the challenges and the opportunities, but it's a start. And it really is, I think, the beginning of perhaps a direction of federal support for higher education that is going to take these evidence-based student success practices that many institutions have had just tremendous success with, and then try to scale them. In addition to that, we're at APLU with many other partner organizations, helping lead a movement around just substantially increasing the maximum Pell Grant. And we recognize Pell is not coming close to fully meeting the needs of students. Of course, for public institutions, the role of state disinvestment in higher education has had just a terrible impact on not just affordability, but also the student support services that institutions are able to provide. We do think, in addition to, of course, states stepping up and providing their historic role in supporting public institutions, through the federal role of investing in the Pell program, just so much more progress can be made on affordability. The Biden administration in Build Back Better proposed substantial increases in the maximum Pell Grant, although again that seems like not likely to move forward right now. Congress does have the opportunity through the annual discretionary appropriations process to make significant progress in boosting the maximum Pell Grant. And that is a significant focus for APLU and much of the higher education community.
So it's gratifying to hear that there's some glimmers of hope there. And I especially appreciate you talking about that $5 million that the Department of Education has. And although that is much less than what had been hoped for in Build Back Better, at least it's movement in the right direction. And really is an opportunity, I think, to help us leverage some of the lessons that we learned during the pandemic. Jessica, Andrea and Stephanie both referenced some of the lessons that they learned. When you take a step back and look at digital education in general, I know that Every Learner did some great research on what are some of the lessons that we learned during the pandemic. What do you see as those primary lessons that we learned about digital learning?
Yeah, one exciting thing that we saw was that perceptions really begin to shift about digital learning. I think prior to the pandemic, there were a lot of people who were really skeptical or even disinterested in digital learning altogether. And, you know, being in a position where we were all forced to engage, I think really opened a lot of faculty's eyes and instructors' eyes to the possibilities. I think we also learned, however, that, you know, it's very difficult work to undertake. I think both Stephanie and Andrea mentioned the fact that there was a lot of training that needed to happen kind of on the front end and also as throughout the process. And that's, you know, for both faculty and students. I think we took for granted that everyone was kind of a digital native in this, you know, digital world, and we all just knew how to do all the things because we have social media, and so surely we know how to learn online or how to teach online. And you know, the reality of the matter is that that's not necessarily the case, and you know, that requires some additional effort and training. I think we also learned that digital learning implementation is kind of a cross-functional, cross-campus initiative, right? It really has to be all hands on deck, you know, support services, IT. I love the, I think it was Andrea who was talking about training up the student tech support. We've learned that all of that is necessary for these endeavors to be successful and to support students in ways that are truly holistic, which is important for the success of the students. I think we've also learned a lot about the importance of leadership buy-in for the long-term sustainability of these initiatives. And we're seeing that right now. A lot of folks started things and started new initiatives and tried new things. And now that folks are coming back on campus and students are coming back on campus, there's a huge question around sustainability, right? Which is part of the reason why we're even having this webinar, because the major part of the sustainability effort is finding the funding to continue to support these initiatives. And so we've really just learned about the importance of having that leadership buy-in and having that long-term vision for how these efforts and how these new initiatives and these new innovative approaches to teaching and learning can be sustained in the long run and not just short-term fixes or band-aids to temporary solutions. I'm sorry, temporary problems.
I know that you don't have video, unfortunately, Jessica, but I saw a lot of head nods from Stephanie and Andrea while you were talking. Stephanie and Andrea, I'm wondering if we could take a moment and have you sort of think back and think about what do you wish that you had known 2 years ago before you had deployed these funds. If you were to do this over again, what would you do the same? What would you do differently? And Stephanie, I'm going to start with you.
Well, that's a big question. What would we do differently? Thanks for starting with me. I appreciate that. You know, I think one of the things that I think about is, and as a comment that Jessica just made, making sure the right people are sitting at the table when you're having the conversations. Who is not sitting in your Zoom? Who's not a box on your screen? What group is not represented that should be represented? Because I think oftentimes in the beginning of trying to scale up quickly to meet needs, you're moving so fast that you're forgetting important people. And then you're needing to circle back around with groups and bring them up to speed, and their insights and their expertise ask questions that change that landscape a little bit. So making sure you're doing that as part of that needs assessment, not skipping the, you know, in addition to who is our audience, but who are internal experts on this, who has a voice in this that we want to make sure that we're representing. It shouldn't just be all instruction. Where's student services? We're missing student services. How are we going to address student services from that online component? So just an example of how you can really look at that landscape to make sure before you even embark on projects, who are the folks that should be involved in those projects, and reaching out and making those bridges. An example of that for us is our IT team brought an enterprise license for Zoom on board. Right? At the very beginning of that, there was lots of different questions because we were using a different web conferencing technology being managed through our central office that we were doing training on. But really, there was a sense of what's happening and what's going on, and will we have two tools or will we have one tool, and really working collectively with that team and bonding together for them to provide the technology backbone for that, and for us to provide the training and professional development related to it, was a very strong relationship that made that product more successful in its implementation than it would have been if we were working in two different silos from each other.
I love that, thinking about who's not at the table, and making sure that we're inclusive in that. Andrea, what do you wish that y'all had known 2 years ago when you started all of this?
I would have wanted to know where the students lived and where the faculty lived. Because what we learn, again, we're a large institution. We have a center for the students to go to get laptops on us and get Wi-Fi so that they can, especially Pell Grant students, they can do this. But the extent by which we needed help for the students, I had no idea. You know, they went back home, so even though they could afford to have Wi-Fi, again, they didn't have equipment because there are 5 people in their home doing the same thing, because the parents are there doing work and the students, and they didn't have an equipment. I had no idea. And faculty, how many faculty rely so heavily on the institution to have all of that they didn't have things at home. They didn't have a computer. They might have had a Wi-Fi, but again, the speed by which that they could do all the tooling that they do normally in a classroom, they couldn't do. I wish we had known that. But one big lesson that we've learned in this process, and it is for a smaller institution and a private institution, this happens all the time. For a mammoth like an R1 land grant, it does not, is when we have a shared vision and one singular goal, we can change everything from policy to funding to physicality. We can change everything on a dime and still be compliant. And so this lesson is one that I want to, every time people ask me, what's the lesson that you learned? Number one, yeah, there's a lot on the technology, but number one is, yes, you can move the Titanic much faster than what we normally believe that we can when we have a common focus, and the focus should be on the student success. So if we do that, we really can move the whole institution. So I couldn't wait to add that to Jessica's comments. So
I love that image of moving the Titanic quickly. And you're right, we oftentimes don't think anything in higher ed moves quickly, but it really can. Craig, that actually makes me want to come back to you. Let's talk about moving sometimes intractable objects like Congress. If we have folks sitting at home or sitting in their offices that are wondering, what can we do to communicate the importance of continued funding to our congressional representatives? How would you suggest that they go about engaging with their congressional representatives?
So Van, thank you for the question. First, I'd say it begins with connecting with your college or university government relations office. They are an invaluable resource to campus leaders. They know your congressional delegation better than anybody else. They know the staff and what will be helpful and what will be unhelpful. So let me begin with that point. Please make sure you're coordinating with your college and university government relations officers. Secondly, just to kind of piggyback on something Jessica said earlier, don't assume congressional staff know what digital learning is. Most people, I think, particularly policymakers and staff, relate to higher education through their own personal experience, whether that be their direct experience themselves or through family members. And as we've talked about, digital learning comes in many different kinds of forms. And I would venture to say most congressional staff probably don't have a full appreciation for what that means. So, as you're possibly engaging policymakers, really step back and begin with an introduction of, well, what exactly is this and what are we trying to accomplish? And from there, I think, get a little bit more specific. But you've really got to start with a common understanding of what exactly is digital learning first.
I think you're right. We're steeped in this every day, and we forget that folks outside of our area of academia don't always know what digital learning is, and they are very much reliant either on their own experiences as students or their staff members' experiences as students. Let me take a moment and see if we've got any questions. We've got a few more minutes here. If you've got any questions, you can throw those in the chat or the Q&A. So let me just take a moment and see if we've got any questions. Well, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to ask our panelists one last question. And that is, if you were going to sit down to somebody who is interested in finding ways to leverage federal funds to improve digital learning and specifically to improve equity, what's your top piece of advice for folks? And Andrea, I'll start with you this time so that Stephanie doesn't feel picked on.
We need to be inclusive and not feel picked up. So no problem, Stephanie. I'll take this one. Thanks, man. I think that is get involved. And I appreciate Craig. I do. I think Katie Fast, my government relations, sometimes feels that I am her staffer, because I'm always bringing things to her to bring it up to Salem to have discussions, 2-pagers, bullet points, that kind of thing. So I'm very tight with it, but it requires energy on my part too. We cannot sit back and just expect things to happen. These funds come in, and sometimes we have complained that they have a very quick turnaround. And again, it takes a while for us to get together and put our plans together and apply for those funds. Somebody needs to be manning and watching to see what's going on there, but engage your network. The CIOs of the R1s institutions in the country have platforms. We have EDUCAUSE, we have all kinds of other places that are communicating and advocating on our behalf as higher eds. And I think you need to put your hands on it. Don't expect other people to be solving the problems or actually articulating what is the opportunity, not just the problem, but what is the opportunity. I think that's the reason why I've been invited to go to a lot of places to talk about broadband, because it's a passionate topic for me. If we don't take advantage and do these fixings now, we're going to be behind for decades to come. So put your hands on it. Get involved. Yes, create the network and let people do their jobs, like the Katies of the world, the broadband, the government relations folks, but just don't give it to them and then take your hand off. Stay involved.
Fantastic. Stephanie, what's your one piece of advice?
Don't make assumptions, right? Don't assume that everybody is entering at the same level of knowledge and understanding and awareness. So don't make those assumptions. Do your homework to figure out how to address those assumptions. Excuse me, not assumptions, but do your homework to figure out where you're really at as a whole. And then I can't stress enough, small actionable changes lead to big impacts as well. So sometimes we think, oh, that will never make a difference. That is so small. But that small change over hundreds of courses is a very large impact. And sometimes we feel like we have to have this really big entry point when really what we need is a small entry point that everybody can get comfortable and familiar with and really gain that confidence in. And then from there, we really make those big gains.
I love that small actionable changes can lead to large impacts. Jessica, what's your one piece of parting advice for folks?
I just say break down the silos. I feel like for so long we've had to work with our heads straight down, just trying to save whatever was in front of our face because we've been in crisis mode. But there's so much that we can learn from each other. There are some folks who have really got some great stuff figured out at other institutions or even sometimes within the same campus. So I think we've got to find new ways to continue to collaborate and start to break down those silos so that we're talking to each other and learning from each other.
I love that, breakdown silos. And Craig, you get the last word this afternoon. What's your one piece of advice?
Well, this is kind of an advocacy 101 kind of thing. So may apply to the topic here, but also certainly more broadly. Have your stories to share, not just data. Data are critically important in everything we do. Of course, we want to ensure everything is grounded in evidence. But as you're engaging with policymakers and more broadly, more often than not, the data that you share will be forgotten soon after that meeting, but what will last often are the personal stories. If you're able to share the example of a student who's been impacted by the institution's focus on digital learning, the resources provided, demonstrate the impact of that federal or state or local government support through stories of those who are most impacted.
I love that, telling stories. Well, folks, I'm sure that y'all join me in thanking our panelists this afternoon. It's been incredible. Let me also just put in a quick plug. One of the other things that we've done is we've published 3 different briefs talking about federal COVID relief funds, as well as some of the infrastructure funds and opportunities that institutions have to leverage those funds. You can find those briefs, as well as eventually a link to this webinar, at everylearnereverywhere.org/investnow. So that's everylearnereverywhere.org/investnow. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. And we are happy that you've been able to spend some time with us. Thank y'all very much.